Oh, thank you.
Let me know when we're good to go, Jeff.
Yeah. Hello out there, denizens in Facebook land. You are about to join a live simulcast of the NASW Community Conversation, Talk Saves Lives. We're hosting this conversation today in recognition of Suicide Prevention Month, and we will be getting started very shortly. If you're watching on Facebook and you have questions for the presenter, you can post them here in the chat and we will funnel those over to the main webinar. Otherwise, thank you for attending and we hope you enjoy. Helen, you can start letting people into the webinar and we can go live now. I'll be on mute.
Hi, everyone. Just going to give people a couple of seconds to get settled in, and then we get started. Want to be respectful of people's time. Subtitles are enabled, and if you need help in how to access them, please let me know. Okay, welcome everyone. So happy to see you all. My name is Helen French. I'm the Director of Development and Continuing Education at NASW New Jersey, and so pleased to see everybody. Just a couple of housekeeping items. When you signed up for this community conversation, you agreed to the Code of Conduct, and we just expect you to be respectful of the presenter and each other, which I know you will be. This community conversation is being streamed live via Facebook, and we are also recording it so people who can't make the presentation can see it later. Suicide is the 13th leading cause of death in New Jersey. And on average, somebody dies in New Jersey every 11 hours. So, this is a really important conversation that we need to have with the general public and also on behalf of your clients. So I'm really excited and very thankful that Elizabeth Clemens of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is here today to talk about this. Thanks so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Helen. I really appreciate you inviting me in, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I had to look at my clock just so I could remember what time it is. So it is 12 o'clock. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. I will do, I'd like to definitely have a group discussion, answer questions at the end of the presentation. So just a note before I get started. And with that, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So good afternoon. Again, my name is Elizabeth Clemens, and I'm the New Jersey Area Director for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Helen, for inviting me today to present this important presentation, Talk Saves Lives, an Introduction to Suicide Prevention. If at any point during today's presentation, you feel the need to step away or turn off your camera, please feel free to do so. Overall, I hope that you're able to learn more about suicide prevention from today's presentation and become more comfortable talking about this important issue. Suicide is a complex health issue. Despite its complexity, suicide can be prevented. Just like there are warning signs and risk factors for other health crises like cardiac arrest, we can learn the warning signs and risk factors that can help us to prevent people from dying by suicide. As with other health issues, prevention can start early, far in advance of the problem, or prevention can occur closer to the time of the crisis. Time can be a critical and life-saving measure. Typically, a life can be saved if you allow time for the person's suicide risk to subside or to get through that period of distress and to get them to mental health help. To prevent suicide, we need to identify persons who may be suicidal, as well as take an active role in connecting them to help before they take the action to end their life. The purpose of Talk Saves Lives is to provide community members with a general overview about suicide, who it affects, and what can be done to prevent it. This presentation will cover some statistics to give you an idea of the scope of the problem of suicide. We will also review some key research findings, including the risk and protective factors that relate to suicide. And we'll talk about what works and what we can all do to prevent this leading cause of death. So before we get started, one really important thing that I want to talk about is how we talk about suicide, and the language that we use really matters. It's important to model appropriate language so that we do not perpetuate the stigma of suicide or mental health conditions. So let's kind of establish a baseline of shared language on this topic. We avoid using the phrase committed suicide, as it can have a negative connotation. Instead, encourage phrases like died by suicide, ended their life, or killed themselves. When talking about suicide and suicide attempts, we avoid referring to suicide attempts as failed or successful. Not only is it unnecessary, these words imply judgment. Instead, I want to encourage the use of phrases such as suicide attempt, suicide, death by suicide, or died by suicide. Educating the public about suicide is critical for encouraging help seeking, raising awareness of risk in vulnerable populations, and advocating for new interventions and prevention strategies for those at risk. When suicide is talked about safely and accurately, we can help reduce the likelihood of its occurrence. With doing all of this, ultimately, we want to change how society understands mental health and suicide. Because when we open up and connect, talk saves lives. So looking at the scope of the problem, suicide is a significant issue that affects individuals, families, and communities. So let's get started with some statistics. Suicide is a global problem. According to the World Health Organization, each year, over 800,000 people die by suicide worldwide. While this is the most accurate data available, we do estimate the numbers to be higher since suicide is underreported in many countries. So at 800,000 deaths by suicide, that works out to a suicide every 40 seconds worldwide. In the United States, suicide rates are recorded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. According to the CDC, just over 47,000 people died by suicide in 2019. Keep in mind that this is the most recent data that we have. I would expect the 2020 data to come out in early 2022. So suicide takes more lives in the US than homicide, war, and natural disasters combined. This makes suicide the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. These high numbers are one of the many reasons that it is important to talk about suicide like any other cause of death. The more we talk, the less stigmatized the idea that we all face struggles and need support becomes. For every death by suicide, it is estimated that 25 others attempt. That's about 1 million Americans each year who survive a suicide attempt. When you think about any loss, it impacts many people in the community, and suicide is no different. The loss affects family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, schools, faith communities, so on and so on. It is estimated that the majority of Americans will experience a suicide loss over the course of their lifetime. So let's take a look at some research and what we know about research and through research. Only in the past several decades have scientists been studying suicide. Research is shedding light on many critical areas, what drives up risk, and what that amounts to effective suicide prevention, and we still have so much more to learn. This section provides an overview of suicide prevention research, key research findings, and future goals in the field. One of the main questions research explores is, why do people take their own life? Through research, we have learned that there is no single cause for suicide. Suicide most often occurs when several stressors and health issues converge to create an experience of hopelessness and despair. And later in the presentation, we will talk about what some of these stressors and health issues could look like. But again, that is really important to understand when looking at why do people take their own lives, is that there is no single cause, but rather multiple intersecting factors. Research has consistently shown that the large majority of people who die by suicide have a mental health condition at the time of their death. It may or may not have been diagnosed by the person or the loved ones, and may or may not have been diagnosed or accurately treated by a mental health professional. That said, research has also made clear that mental health conditions cannot be the whole story. The vast majority of people who have these health conditions do not go on to die by suicide. In addition to mental health conditions, there are many other factors that increase a risk, someone's suicidal risk as well. We've learned that the brains of people who die by suicide differ from those who die from other causes in terms of structure and function, specifically in the areas related to stress response and impulse control. We've also learned that most people who are suicidal are ambivalent about taking their life. Part of them wants to live, part of them wants to die. The research has informed key strategies in suicide prevention that involve engaging the part of the person that wants to stay alive and helping to create distance from the part of them that wants to die. One way to do this is to help the person connect with reasons for living, while at the same time decreasing the visibility and presence of things around them that may facilitate their desire to die. So again, that's a really important thing to think about here, right? One way that you can help save someone's life in the midst of a suicidal crisis is to connect them with the reasons for living, while at the same time decreasing the presence from the things around them that they may use to end their life. One of the many important things that we have learned from research is about the perspective of a suicidal person, that a crisis point has been reached. For a suicidal person, the pain becomes unbearable, whether it's emotional pain, physical pain, or sometimes both. For a moment, I'd like you to think back to the most physically painful experience of your life. If you have that moment, try to think, would you be able to give someone clear and accurate directions to your house while you were experiencing that tremendous pain? Probably not. The pain makes ordinary things nearly impossible. And for a suicidal person, thinking becomes constricted at that moment of crisis. Someone who considers suicide cannot foresee a time when that unbearable pain will end. Understanding the perspective of a suicidal person has also helped us to learn that suicidal feelings are often temporary. They can come on intensely and can sometimes pass in minutes or hours. Keeping people safe and helping them feel supported can get them through those most critical moments. There is evidence that putting time and distance between an individual who is suicidal and the means to take their life is a life-saving action. This is why it's so important that we take steps when we know someone is struggling to help keep them safe. Research has also helped determine the key factors that increase the risk for suicide. So risk factors are defined as characteristics or conditions that increase the chance a person may take their life. Risk factors are important to know and to understand when you're looking at the big picture and trying to better understand if someone is going, or if someone is considering ending their life, So just like someone who is at risk for heart disease because of high blood pressure or has a history of heart disease in the family, some people are at a higher risk for suicide than others. The main factors which you see on the screen are grouped into 3 categories. So we have health factors, historical factors, and environmental factors. These risk factors can converge at different times in life and increase a person's risk for suicidal behavior at particular points in time. So let's look oh, what happened? Oh no, I'm sorry guys, there we go, okay. So let's look closer at each one of those factors, starting with health factors. The first type of risk factor included in health factors are biological and psychological medical conditions, the most significant of which are mental health conditions. As I said before, most people who die by suicide have an active mental health problem at the time of their death. Depression is the most common mental health condition and is the one that is most associated with suicide, but it's not the only one. Bipolar is also shown to be high risk, although the disorder is less common than depression. Because these conditions put a person at greater risk for suicide, detecting the presence of a mental health condition is critically important. The best way to be sure when you feel concerned or detect a possible change in you or a loved one's mental health is for the person at risk to seek a professional evaluation and effective treatment for them. Many people may not realize that their distress has actually become a health problem. So providing information about how to access mental health care or the crisis number if their distress is high can be a solid step in helping them connect to the help they need. We will talk more about this later in the discussion when we directly address prevention efforts. So what are some other health factors? Serious or chronic health conditions can increase risk, especially when the person also has mental health issues, right? Going back and looking about that it's not one single cause. There's multiple factors as to why someone ends their life. And chronic pain and serious head injuries have also been found to increase suicide risk. The second type of risk factors include historical factors, such as family history of suicide, a family history of mental health conditions, or past trauma such as sexual abuse or combat stress. Research has found that a history of childhood abuse can also contribute to a suicide risk. And while most people who attempt suicide do not go on to die by suicide, previous suicide attempts are also considered historical risk factors for suicide and also put a person at increased risk. The third type of risk factor are environmental factors that involve the circumstances of a person's life. Often there are aspects of a person's environment that can contribute to their overall level of risk. So let's look at a few of the most common environmental factors. Having access to a way of killing oneself is referred to as access to lethal means. This includes having access to a variety. I'm not quite sure what keeps happening. I'm sorry. This includes having access to a variety of things, such as firearms, drugs, a bridge, a car. And research has shown that contagion, defined as the exposure of another person's suicide or to graphic or sensationalized accounts of suicide, especially among those with other risk factors, can increase a person's risk of suicide. So again, in short, that research has shown that contagion can increase a person's suicide risk. Prolonged stress may include harassment, bullying, relationship problems, legal problems, and unemployment. Stressful life events, which vary across the lifespan, include experiences like divorce, legal problems, or job loss. So to better understand suicide risk, here's an example of a set of risk factors that could converge in a person who is suicidal. This example that you see here shows what is often the public's perception of suicide. When someone dies by suicide, often the story only talks about the environmental factors. People see a life event like a breakup or bullying or a job loss, and then they see the person die by suicide. So they might assume that the person killed themselves because of that stressful life event. But that's never the full story. What they don't know is that the person who died by suicide had a genetic risk for suicide. They were suffering from depression and anxiety disorders, and their work life had become increasingly stressful. The underlying depression and anxiety made the entire situation worse, and then the work stress on top of that made their depression even worse. Also, they may be drinking or had been drinking more than normal or using more harmful drugs. The key here is that the combination of risk factors could have contributed to the suicide death. Therefore, while a life event like the divorce or a breakup or a job loss can play a participating role for suicidal behavior without underlying risk factors, life events alone aren't thought to cause suicide. So looking to the future, research will help us find the best ways to fight suicide. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is the largest private funder in research. So we really, this is something that we really invest in and we really know will help make a difference in better understanding suicide, but also in finding the best ways to fight suicide. So research is looking for bias. So what do we know right now, right? Or what are some things we're looking for in the future? So research is looking for biomarkers. So for example, something testable in a blood sample, maybe that would help us to identify someone at risk. A number of clinical treatments, like particular types of therapy, are effective for suicidal people, and more need to be developed and studied. As we know, what works for one person may not, and most likely will not work for another person. So here, the good news is that through research, we are learning more and more about what helps those who are in a suicidal crisis. And finally, research can also help us to identify the most effective programs and interventions to reduce rates and to reduce risk in those suffering from mental health conditions. So now we're going to take a look at prevention. Just like there are risk factors that increase a person's risk for suicide, there are also protective factors that lower a person's risk. If you are proactive about your mental health, you make an effort to get healthier, you are protecting yourself. We'll come back and talk more about this in a minute. Feeling connected to family and community support can protect against suicide. When someone is struggling with depression, anxiety, psychosis, substance abuse, these protective factors that may normally be strong can erode and temporarily weaken. When that happens, having friends and family to remind us our strengths can be a tremendous protective factor. Problem-solving skills also can help. Life can get really hard, but being able to see a way through problems is a protective factor. Cultural and religious beliefs that encourage connecting and help seeking, discourage suicidal behavior, or create a strong sense of purpose can also be a protective factor. Because mental health care is so important for preventing suicide, we are going to focus on this topic for the next few minutes. Getting effective treatment for mental health conditions like depression or anxiety can prevent suicide. Critical to suicide prevention is getting people connected to mental health treatment. One of the biggest challenges in fighting suicide is getting people to address their mental health in the same way they would their physical health. In fact, of those suffering from a mental health condition, less than half seek treatment. One way to encourage individuals to seek help for their mental health conditions is to treat mental health like any aspect of our health. There are certain times when a person becomes ill, and it's critical to seek a trained professional. We need to create a culture where everyone knows that it's smart to take care of our mental health, just like we do our physical health. Taking care of our mental health is just as important as taking care of our physical health. So seeing a mental health professional is a sign of strength, and many are taking that step. The person seeking help should request a thorough evaluation to figure out if there is a mental health condition affecting their life. There are many types of treatment available, like various kinds of psychotherapy and medications. And research has shown that for many people, the combination of both psychotherapy and medications tend to be the most helpful. But again, the most important thing to remember here, as I just said earlier, is that you have to find the treatment that works best for the individual. And what may work for one person may not work for another person. Looking at this, the good news is that advocacy efforts are improving access to mental health services so that more people can get the treatment they need. Now, I know we still have a long way to go in this, but again, we are improving the access to that through our advocacy efforts. So across the board, the law now requires insurance plans to cover mental health services on par with physical health services. If we need mental health services, and 1 out of 4 of us will at some point, we should get treated and get our health back on track. Just like people can find strategies to optimize their physical health, people can do the same for their mental health. In addition to professional mental health care, proactive self-care strategies like good sleep habits, exercise, nutrition, and stress management can play a critical role in protecting mental health and promoting resilience. Prevention efforts also include support for those touched by suicide. The loss of one person to suicide profoundly impacts many. It's important that survivors have the support they need both to heal and to reduce their own suicide risk. And since those with lived experience are at an increased risk, we need to make sure they have the support they need too. For people who are at a crisis point, the most important thing that you can do is to put time in between the suicidal person and the way of ending their life. Research shows that by temporarily reducing a suicidal person's access to lethal means, we give suicidal individuals time for the intense suicide risk to diminish, and time for someone to intervene with mental health support and resources. For the majority of people who experience a suicidal crisis, if unable to access their chosen method, even temporarily, they are unlikely to engage in another action to end their life. So I want to say that again, because that's really important to understand, especially if you encounter someone who is actively suicidal or who is thinking about ending their life and you know that they have a plan. So again, for the majority of people who experience a suicidal crisis, if they are unable to access their chosen method, even temporarily, they are unlikely to engage in another action that would end their life. In most cases, when a suicidal person doesn't have current access to the means that has been on their mind, they don't substitute with another method. Therefore, a clear way to prevent suicide is to limit access to lethal means. During a period of high risk, the safer the environment is, the better a chance a suicidal person has of living through that crisis period. Suicide prevention research has looked at a number of ways to create safer environments. So installing inexpensive carbon monoxide sensors would automatically shut cars off if carbon monoxide levels reach an unsafe number would save lives. We've learned through research that installing barriers on bridges deters suicide. And in many cases, bridge barriers actually lowered the suicide rate for the entire region. I know that that's something that I've seen a lot of in North Jersey. That's where I live. So I spend more time driving around North Jersey, but obviously we've seen that on the GW, we've seen that on the 78 overpass. So it's really, it's always encouraging when I see that, because again, not only will it deter suicides, but it actually could lower the suicide rate for the region. So limiting access to lethal means, restricting access to potentially lethal medications reduces suicides and can be as simple as requiring lethal drugs to be sold in blister packaging. Firearms, this is a really important one. So firearm safety is critical to reducing suicide rates. In the United States, firearms are used in roughly half of all suicides, 51% of deaths by suicide in the United States are by firearms. So this is why firearm safety is absolutely critical. So making suicide prevention an important part of gun safety education. And as noted already, and contrary to what you may think, when access to lethal means are limited, most people who are suicidal do not find other means. So let's look at what you can do. Now that we've reviewed key suicide prevention efforts, it's time for you to learn about the role that you can play and what you can do to help prevent suicide. So having a conversation, it's important to have a caring, supportive conversation with someone you might be worried about to allow them to share with you what they are experiencing. A conversation is a way to show you care and allows you to gain more information about the level of distress that that person may be in. Let's start by talking about suicide warning signs. Watch for the warning signs in yourself and in others. While many of the suicide risk factors we discussed endure over a longer period of time, warning signs are observable signs that signal suicide risk in the near future. It's important to pay attention to both the risk factors discussed earlier and the warning signs we are talking about now. If you see warning signs, reach out to the individuals in your life you're concerned about, or reach out to others if you in fact are the individual and you are the one struggling. Seek mental health services if you are depressed or if your anxiety regularly interferes with your daily life, and encourage others to do the same. Suicide warning signs are typically displayed in three main ways that we can detect: talk, behavior, mood. And we're going to break each one of these down. Many people who are suicidal talk about ending their life. This may be directly or indirectly. The language used may be direct or indirect. A person may say it outright, or they may even joke about it. But either way, take it seriously. Some people say they have no reason to live. Others say things like they feel trapped or that they are a burden to you or their family. They may also talk about feeling overwhelmed or being in unbearable pain. Behaviors that are atypical for an individual should also encourage you to speak to the person about what you are noticing. People thinking about suicide can display certain behaviors. There may be an increased use of drugs or alcohol, They also may have trouble sleeping, maybe experiencing insomnia or sleeping too much. They may start acting more recklessly, possibly withdraw from activities, especially activities that they normally enjoy doing. They may also isolate themselves from family and friends. Also, you could notice that they are looking for a way to kill themselves, such as searching online for methods or shopping for a firearm. And one final behavior to note is the giving away of possession. So they may do this or show related behavior or other related behaviors, such as reckless spending. So buying things that you may not normally see them buying. And mood. So the people at risk for suicide can display, and quite often subtly display, any of the following moods that you see on your screen: depression, apathy, rage, irritability, impulsivity, humiliation, anxiety, and these are just a few. We all have ups and downs in our mood. But when you notice a change that seems uncharacteristic or concerning, it's important to speak to the person about what you have noticed. Keep in mind, or not keep in mind, I'm sorry. So for example, sudden and unexplained happiness can indicate the individual has decided on a plan and is relieved that they will no longer be in pain, right? That's always something that I think is really important to point out, because so many of us think that we're going to notice the opposite of that, right? We're going to notice the depression. We're going to notice the anxiety. We're going to notice the sadness. But it's really important to also understand when we talk about mood and when we talk about warning signs, that unexplained happiness can indicate, can be a warning sign, because it often is a mood that is being displayed because this individual has decided on a plan for how they'd like to take their life. So that was a lot of things that we just, covered and that we told you to look for. But really, the most important thing I would say is to trust your gut. So look for changes in behavior and trust your instincts. Assume that you're the only one who is going to reach out. In so many instances and so many conversations that I have with people, they tell me how they've talked about their concern for someone amongst themselves or even amongst someone else, but they hesitate to reach out to the person directly. They assume sometimes that other people have also noticed this behavior and that maybe the other person will reach out. So here's kind of the rule of thumb on this, if you will. If you are wondering if someone is depressed or overly anxious, that's a sure sign that you should reach out. The same goes for you. If you are having suicidal thoughts, that's a sure sign you need to seek help. If you've reached out before, reach out again. The first time the person may not be receptive, keep trying. Try talking to someone else or with a professional. And even if suicide turns out not to be a concern, they may still be in distress and they may feel comforted and supported just by knowing that you care and that you are taking the time to listen. So how to reach out? Talk to them in private. Listen to their story. Express concern and caring. Ask directly about suicidal thoughts. Don't be afraid to ask the direct question, are you thinking of ending your life? Are you thinking of killing yourself? And then encourage them to seek mental health services. And if it's in a crisis, take them directly to help or call 911. There are some things to avoid when talking with someone who may be suffering from depression or anxiety. You want to avoid minimizing their feelings. Those of us who have never experienced major depression literally cannot imagine what it feels like. You'll want to avoid trying to convince them that life is worth living. If a person is nearing a crisis point, they are not thinking clearly. Philosophical debates about life being worth living tend not to be helpful at that time. And you want to avoid advice to fix it. If the person is having a heart attack, you wouldn't tell them to start exercising or eat a healthier diet at that time. If they are in crisis, what they need is to be heard, and then they need to be led to help. Listen to their story and offer to help them find a mental health professional or a health professional at that. Help them take the active steps towards keeping their environment safe. If you think they might make an attempt on their life soon, stay with them. Do not leave them alone. However, if the situation puts your own safety at risk, leave the area immediately and call 911. Help them remove lethal means or remove themselves from the potentially dangerous area. Escort them to mental health services or an emergency room. Help them to call the lifeline or call the lifeline yourself, and a trained counselor will help tell you what you should do to help the person in distress. If they do not feel comfortable speaking to a counselor on the phone, they can also text TALK to the crisis line at 741-741. If this is maybe the first time you are seeing these numbers, I would highly encourage you just to take 5 seconds and pull out your phone and just take a screenshot of this page so that you can always have the numbers handy. Even if you never use these resources for yourself, you may need them to help a friend. And keep in mind that both the Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the Crisis Text Line are open 24/7, 365. If it is an emergency, such as a suicide attempt in progress, you will want to call 911. Together, we can create a culture that's smart about mental health, will save lives, and vastly improve the lives of many more. It's a simple yet powerful idea. Talk saves lives. By caring and reaching out, we can all play a part in suicide prevention. So thank you again, Helen, for inviting me to be a part of your meeting this afternoon. I really appreciate it. And I would love to open it up and answer as many questions as I can. I say that because I am not a mental health professional. So I want to, again, answer your questions to the best of my ability. And if I cannot, make sure that we get you connected to someone who can answer those questions.
Helen, you're on mute.
Okay, well, I can definitely jump in if you want. So when you ask the question for every death, how many attempts, are you referring to that particular individual?
That was my question.
Okay,
And I missed the slide. I was writing notes and the slide went too quick, but somebody wrote 25. So.
Oh,
I just-
perfect.
yeah,
Oh,
thank you.
yes. Sorry about that. I should have read a little further on.
Oh, no worries.
So at least that's all the questions from the chat, but I know, Helen, I think you guys had maybe from Facebook, or I would welcome if anyone wants to come off mute and ask a question. That would be great, or feedback, anything.
I think Helen is having some technical difficulties. I don't think I can unmute her, but either way, I'll just go ahead with asking kind of a question. I was interested in the fact that the text and the hotline run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So how does the organization pick the people? Like, do they give them training? Is it run by volunteers?
So it is my understanding, AFSP is not affiliated with the hotline, the crisis line. What we are affiliated with is the advocacy efforts to get it towards the 988 number, so the 3-digit number. But from my understanding with how the crisis line and text line both work is that they are volunteer based, and that those volunteers do have to go through a training. I don't know how rigorous or how extensive that training may be. And I also know that with a lot of the numbers, when you call the national number, you often are connected to the local lifeline. So that's a thing to remember, but I do know that they are run by volunteers and there is a training involved with that.
I wanted to volunteer and I tried to do that training for the crisis text hotline. And I have a master's in social work and it was not easy. I actually failed multiple times the training, and they want to make sure you give very specific answers. And so it definitely took a few attempts for me to actually be able to be accepted into the crisis text hotline. So I could tell you it's not like a fast, easy training. I really struggled with it. It was definitely more challenging than I thought it would be. I don't know if that's helpful for anyone to know.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, this is Jeff. Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Jeff.
Hi, I'm
Oh.
so sorry. Helen and I are both having technical difficulties with our laptops, but I was able to get into the video on my phone. And I think if other people have questions, I would say if you can unmute yourselves to ask, since there's only about 30 of us on the call, you can unmute to ask. Or if you raise your hand, I think I can unmute you through my phone. So let me pull up the screen and see if I can see any hands up on the participant page. While I'm
I
looking,
know Razia has a
I
question.
do have a few
okay,
questions.
okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, I do have a few questions that Helen would like me to ask on her behalf. She wants to know, what is the blister package?
Yeah, okay, I'll start with that one. So the blister packaging is just where, when you have, what's like the most relevant one I'm trying to think about, like NyQuil cold tablets, and like you really have to like split it properly and tear it to open. It's putting pills basically individually wrapped so that you can't just open the bottle, dump a bunch of pills in your hand and ingest them. They'd have to sit there and open pills individually, which again, going back to our conversation about time and putting time in between the suicidal person, between the person who is suicidal and their method of dying by suicide, blister packaging may allow that time so that while they're potentially sitting there trying to get these pills open, the moment of crisis may pass, or it may allow time for someone to intervene.
Thank you so much for answering that. And another question is, do you have any ideas on any trends with youth suicide?
Say that one more time.
Any trends with youth age suicide victims?
Yeah, so I don't currently. It's actually something that we're having some ongoing discussions, particularly in New Jersey about, because I'm sure you guys are aware there seems to be an uptick in suicides for the youth. What we do know, at least right now, and what I can share is in New Jersey, that it is the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 34 years old. I know that's a bit of a gap. But again, yeah, it's hard. We're having active conversations about this right now. I think there's a lot going on with the youth and the transition back into schools. These kids spent a year out of the classroom. It's virtual. They're getting, maybe they got used to virtual. They're getting back to the in-person and making sure that they have the support that they need. We do have some really great school-based youth programs that we do when we're invited into schools. So yeah, not so much I can share on the trends right now, but there are, what I would encourage you to with AFSP, because we do focus on the general scope of suicide. There is a great organization in New Jersey, the Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide, based in Monmouth and Ocean County. They really focus on teen suicide and they do a really excellent job. So I would encourage you to reach out to them as well if you'd like more information specifically on the teen suicide.
Okay, and then her last question. Oh, I'm sorry, Danielle, you can go.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Is there any talk, and maybe you don't know, about sort of introducing any of this into sort of like the school curriculum?
So it's based on a district decision, on the school board decision. So we offer these programs. Unfortunately, a lot of the times our programs are, well, I wouldn't say unfortunately, a lot of the times our programs are brought to school boards' attention through the parents. When a child may die by suicide, the parents tend to maybe want to get involved and it really is based on the school board's decision. So I do know that there is still in place, I believe it's like that 2-hour requirement every year that they have to have for suicide prevention training. That can be done in a multitude of programs, not just with AFSP, but a multitude of ways. There's online programs. Signs Matter is a really good one that we do. But we do try. I will say that I've had a lot of discussions with school boards this year in the importance of, you know, not only talking about mental health amongst the students, but how are we educating the teachers, especially now that we're back to in-person learning, and the teachers are spending a lot of time with your students. As a mom, I mean, my kid spends more time at school with her teacher than she does at home, unless it's the weekend. So, you know, how can we better educate the teachers to make sure that they know what to look for in these kids and how they can play a role in keeping the kids safe and protecting their mental health?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Elizabeth, my final question was, does the ASFP have any resources for the LGBT community as well as the minority community?
We do. So I don't have them on hand. So Helen, can I send you that in an email after the fact? And if you can disperse to everyone. What I will share, I hope I don't get in trouble for this, so don't repeat it, which I know is the worst thing to say, right? We're Facebook Live. But New Jersey was scheduled to have an LGBTQ plus Stronger Communities Conference in March of 2020. And obviously that was right at the height of the pandemic. And we have rescheduled that for March of 2022, I believe. So I don't have any information to share, just well, I don't have information that I can share yet, but once I have that, I will share that as well, because that is an incredible conference. We'll have 3 keynote speakers. We'll have breakout sessions, again, all focused on LGBTQ plus youth. So I will definitely I'll share that, Helen, with you when I have it, probably in like December. And then, but in the meantime, I'll send you some things that I can share, as well as some minority health resources. Thank you. Those are great questions.
Razia, thanks so much for stepping in to help out while we're dealing with these technical issues on the back end here. I'm looking in the chat now just to see if there's any other questions, but I don't see any in the chat that I can access. And I don't see any other participant hands up in the participant list. So I will just, again, Elizabeth, thank you so much for taking the time for this great presentation today. And I do believe I heard you say you'd be sending us slides and resources that we can share with people afterwards.
Yes, I can't share the slides, but I can definitely share some additional resources. So I think, Helen, maybe if anyone comes to you with other questions, or even in the future, I'll send you what has been asked, but I can always share more.
Okay, great. And so when you share that information, we will send it to everybody who registered for this event, along with the link to the archived video on YouTube.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate you tuning in and learning more about the role that you can play in, you know, creating a safer community, and ultimately helping us to save lives and bring hope to those affected by suicide. So thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon. I appreciate it.
Thank you all so much, and enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks, you too.
Still can't end it.
I
Can you hear me, Helen? I can hear you now, and I can see, but I still can't get to the button that ends the conference for everybody.
oh, you can hear me now?
I can hear you now, and I can see you now.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, wait. I have Zoom.
buttons.
No, Zoom just came back active for me. I think I can end the call.
Okay, jolly good. Thank you.
What fun that was. Nope, it won't end. I'm clicking the end button and nothing's happening. So my computer still isn't working right. Hey, let me try Xing out. Nope, this is so weird.
So weird.
It's even more bizarre that both of our laptops are having the same problem. I wonder if there was a glitch in our master Zoom account. I can't hear you anymore. This is bizarre.